So in my work in training teachers, I've always been a very big advocate for active learning, which is, as it sounds, it's activities that put the student at the center of the learning, rather than just like a passive recipient for information that they sit and listen to whatever the teacher has to offer. So I don't know if you're familiar with the expression like guides on the side instead of sage on the stage, right? So that kind of learning activities that ask the teacher to be more of a guide on the side than the sage on the stage. Activities that require less input from the teacher and more input from the students, and where the learning is done because of the students, with the students, not just by the students passively. So that's always been my preferred pedagogy, right? But while it's always seemed, I think, like a very good idea, and I've always very much encouraged it, now I think it's become a bit of a necessity because we're not there the whole time, and we're not able to give the students all of the information. So if we can empower them to learn on their own more with less input from us, again, while it's always a good idea, okay, and the research shows that it encourages more critical thinking and better retention, and it gives them the skills for lifelong learning, which I think in Kodesh is especially critical because we can only teach a finite amount, right? You can teach a finite amount of psukim from grade 1 to 12. But if you can teach them how to learn, you've taught them so much more, they can learn forever. So it's always been a good idea, but now I think it's really essential. And I also think that for those of you that are using, well, none of you are using Zoom or starting to use Zoom or potentially using Zoom, we're starting to experience a lot of limitations with teleconferencing and with Zoom. Limited devices per child, I'm sure limited phone lines per child for telephonic conferences. A lot of Zoom fatigue, and I'm sure also the telephone fatigue also from just sitting and listening without engaging for hours and hours on end. I think it's taking a huge toll on teachers that they have to teach live from their home while their own children are running around in their homes. So I think that must be exhausting and very, very difficult to navigate. And also the biggest thing for me, and this has been my negative experience with Zoom, is that there's very, very limited engagement. So when you have a few people and you can see everyone and people can ask questions, and that's okay. You know, I can manage a class of about up to 15, 16. Anything more than that, and it's impossible to engage, even with things like breakout rooms, or it's impossible to really keep a hold of what's going on in the classroom, and the students do become very, very passive. Anyone have a question? No, okay. So based on that, so my outcomes for today, let's just share the screen again, are that I hoped that to help you to be able to design learning activities that rely less on the teacher and more on the students, which again is a good idea all the time, but especially important now, and require more critical thinking and active engagement from the students. We're going to be talking about using projects to learn. I just want to make a fundamental disclaimer at this point. Okay, there's a fundamental premise here, and that is that we're not talking about teaching and then setting a project at the end, which is as old as teaching. It's valuable. I'm not trying to put it down. When you teach and then you set your students a project, from Bloom's taxonomy, from just simple knowledge and understanding to more critical thinking, to be able to apply, to be able to evaluate, to be able to analyze, right? And so on, to create. So projects are valuable, but I'm talking about something else here. I'm talking about using a project to learn. So that means that the project or the question is presented right at the beginning of the unit, so you haven't yet taught the material, and then we learn. And you'll see when I bring examples and whatnot that the importance of this clarification and why this makes such a big difference is because the presenting the project at the beginning creates context and relevance and meaning for the whole learning. So I need to learn this, I want to learn this because it's important for what I'm about to do next. And just to say that this includes aspects of project-based learning, problem-based learning, and inquiry-based learning, which are also pedagogies, which I've put here. I'm going to send you the slides afterwards. I'll send them to Amian and she can send them on to you. I've put them here in case you want to look them up further, and obviously I'd encourage you to do so. So to go into it and to talk about how this works and using an example. So step number one is that we present our students with a key question or with project instructions. So this is the beginning. Again, they haven't yet learned the material. So for example, a key question would be, why did the brothers sell Yosef? So they haven't yet learned the psukim, they haven't yet learned the text. We're starting with the question, why did the brothers sell Yosef? Or for example, a project. So this is a project in which we're going to be creating a book about Megillas Rus and the messages that we can learn from it and apply to our own lives. So that's the starting point. This is what we're going to do. Step number 2 is we then ask the students for some input. So this is something that you could do either via Zoom. Back in the classroom, you can do it in the classroom. You could do this via telephone conference. What do we need to know or ask in order to be able to answer this question? So let's think about, we haven't yet learned this, what are we going to need to learn? So, okay, obviously we're going to need to learn the psukim to be able to answer the question of why the brothers sold Yosef. Okay, so when we do that, let's try and think of other questions that can help us answer this question. So what was the Ksonus Pasim? What was that all about? What was the Dibasam Ra? Why did Yosef tell his brothers the dreams if he knew that they hated him so much? So all these questions are maybe going to help us understand why the brothers sold him. So we're going to break it down into, the students are going to help you break it down to a lot of mini questions and to help you come to that big question. And it comes from them, which is amazing, because then they're engaging with what do I need to know? And I own this. It's coming from me. Yeah, Mrs. Sherman, yeah.
But wouldn't they have to, I mean, you could ask the key question, but if you didn't read the psukim first, how would they even know to ask the other question?
Hold on. So, okay, so how are they going to know what to ask if we haven't yet read it?
To ask the Basamra, to ask Ksonus Pasim.
Right, exactly.
They know about all that from Parsha, maybe.
Absolutely. So it will kind of depend on the grade level. Sometimes they've learned enough about it in Parsha or somewhere else to be able to ask. And sometimes you say, okay, we need to learn the psukim, and then we can figure out, we're going to just learn the chat, we're going to read it through. We're going to spend 15 minutes on this on Zoom together in chavruses and breakout rooms. Everyone's going to spend 15 minutes. We're just looking for questions that are going to help us answer that key question. Right. Okay. Or for example, for the project, what are we going to need to know or ask to be able to do this? So our project is we're writing a book about Rus. So we're going to need to know the story. We're going to need to know the story in quite a bit of detail if we're going to make a book out of it. We're going to need to look for specifically for the midas and mitzvahs in the Megillah that are going to help us, that we're going to use for our book, and then how we can apply those. The third thing we're going to do is that then you give them the resources and your expectations for the project. So I want to just go to this slide at this point. So there are 2 options for resources. There are synchronous resources and asynchronous resources. So this is especially relevant for the times we're in right now. So synchronous resources are resources where we connect in real time, like we're doing right now. We're all on it at the same time. So like a webinar or a teleconference. It's got its advantages in that it's collaborative. Everybody can connect. We can ask questions. We can do a little bit of chavrusa. So those are synchronous resources where the teacher's teaching a class they need to know the material in order to be able to answer the question, right? So she's doing it via webinar, via teleconference, etc. Asynchronous is not in real time, and this is really where I want us to start shifting our minds towards. We don't need to necessarily be there. We don't need to be doing it in real time. So what can I send out? What resources can I send out for the students to work through in their own time? So can I make pre-recorded videos explaining things? Can I send out WhatsApp voice notes possibly? Again, this is all going to depend on your school's ethos and policies, and printed material. So sources, Makairos with questions, broken down, data capture sheets that they can figure things out on their own, and I'm going to give you examples of these. Online resources, if that's appropriate for what you're doing, online videos that you would perhaps direct them to or something, or an online share, but again, all depending on your school's ethos and etc. And if appropriate, there's potentially space for independent research here, but again, it depends on your school's ethos and the girls and the grade level. The big advantage of asynchronous resources is that students can listen and re-listen, and that could be super helpful for them. So if they didn't understand something first time, they can listen again until they understand it again second time. So especially if you're teaching like a new concept in TikTok, something like that. So if you can make a video of yourself teaching it, a child can listen, and they didn't get it, they can listen again, which is an advantage over school teaching in a sense, because in a classroom, you always have a situation where one child has hacked it straight away, and you're explaining it 4 or 5 times for everybody else. right? And these other children are bored. So here, the children who want to listen once can listen once. The children who want to listen a lot of times can listen a lot of times. They can go at their own pace, and they don't have to all do it at the same time, so you don't have a limited devices problem, and there are a lot of advantages. And then we talk about blended learning, where it's a combination, where we're going to do some Zoom teaching, and this is probably what would work best for most people. Some Zoom teaching, some teleconferencing, and some asynchronous resources that you send out and you do in your own time. And we're going to go back now and look at examples of this. So we've got our key question. What do we need to know in order to be able to do this? Now I'm going to give you the resources. So say for the Megillah project, what I might do, and this is obviously for a younger grade, I did this with my daughter. I did a project with my daughter on Megillah. So I had her listen to Rabbi Joraval on Megillah. She listened to it as many times as she needed to listen. And she's been working on this book, and she actually just finished it today. She's very excited. But she listens as many times. So for example, she started the book with a big family tree, and they're starting with Elimelech and ending with David HaMelech. So she needed to listen to the beginning of the tape and the end of the tape, and she go backwards and forwards and keep re-listening so that she could, because the beginning of the story talks about Elimelech's part of the family tree, the end of the story talks about Boaz's part until David HaMelech. So that's the asynchronous resources. And you're going to give the students a pack of material, whatever they need to be able to, whatever they need to know in order to be able to complete the project. You're also going to give them the expectations. So what, you know, I don't want a fluffy book by the end of it, right? Or I don't want a fluffy one paragraph answer about why the brother sold Joseph. So I'm going to give you my expectations. It has to include this, it has to answer that, it has to make mention of this Mefarish and what this Makar says and so on. It has to have 3 mitzvahs from Megillah and how we can apply them today, etc. Okay, so clear expectations. And then the students do the actual research themselves. This is self-explanatory, right? There's nothing to say here. They go and they do the work. We're going to talk about checkpoints and assessment when we come back to an example soon, but then they take what you've given them, they take the question, what they need to know, this is what I'm going to use to help me know it, and they do the work. And then at a certain point, when by the deadline, they submit or they present their work, right? So either they submit it, they email, they scan it, they drop it at your house, depending on your lockdown restrictions, or they present it. So this is another nice way to use Zoom. They can present online. The whole class can meet for a Zoom meeting, and every student can have an opportunity to present their thing for 2 minutes, like you would in a real classroom. If they make a short video of their work, then you can send it around to each other, okay? Or you can wait till you get back to school and present it then, but there is the possibility of doing it over Zoom. So to look at an example, and then I'll take questions, I think. I think it's best to do an example first. Okay, so to look at an example, this is elementary school teaching Kodesh Yitzchak. I know, like, no one here is elementary, right? But okay, let's do this example anyways, because it will be valuable in some sense. We'll go through it quickly. So the key question that I'm going to give the students, to start with the orange box, the key question I'm going to give the students is that what's going to be a project. It's going to be a project of, we're going to figure out the best way possible to teach Kodesh Yitzchak to the lower grades. We're going to become the teachers to teach it to the lower grades. And this is one of these like cheat projects that's adaptable for anything. Anytime you're not sure how to present it as a project, you say, hey, we're going to teach it to the lower grades, we're going to teach it to somebody else, and then that's the create on Bloom's taxonomy, where you have to think about the material and understand it well enough to be able to teach it to somebody else, and you learn from that. So what do we need to ask or know in order to be able to do this? So again, we have to learn the psukim, okay? We might know some things from Parasha that give us an idea of what questions to ask. So for example, how old was Yitzchak at the time? What did he know about what was going on? Did he know what happened at the end of Kodesh Yitzchak? Maybe these are some of the questions that we need to discuss. Maybe we need to learn the psukim first and then discuss the questions. Resources and expectations. So this is where I want to show you how I would do this for an elementary school or even for younger grades. So it's very hard to teach Chumash via Zoom. It's very hard to do the psukim the way we normally do it in the classroom. But I would anyways challenge the way we often regularly do it in the classroom, because I think we need to move towards, I don't know how you're teaching it, but I think we need to move towards a model anyways where the students are working out on their own. So I would do in an elementary school. This is an example of a worksheet. So I would give them each pasuk like this in big with instructions. I would give them 3 per day. So you've got to read the pasuk out loud because it's important to maintain the skill of actual reading. You've got to highlight all the prefixes in green, all the names in yellow, all the shirashim that you already know in blue. I'm going to give you some words I don't expect you to know. So say, for example, grade 5, I'm thinking grade 5 in my country, but I don't know grade 5 in your country. So actually, I'm thinking more like grade 3, but okay. I don't know if they would know Yechidcha. I don't know if they would know La'ila. They would know Ahab, they would know Har. There are a lot of Shirashim they would know. It could be they would even know them all where you are, okay? At the point where you're teaching. So I want you to decode the pasuk by color, then write in the meanings on top. I'm giving you space to write it in, and then read it again, trying to understand what it's saying. And then there are some questions at the bottom so that they can process and comprehend, right? So who's speaking in the pasuk? Fill in the speech bubble to show what he says. And then some thinking questions. Why do you think he uses so many words instead of just saying Yitzchak? Do you see, this is again a grade where they're not yet learning Rashi. Do you see any similarities between this instruction? So it's grade 3. I keep going back and forth about this. I would say grade 3. Do you see any similarities between this instruction and the instruction in the first sign? Go back to the first pasuk of Lech Lecha for a clue. They've got to compare the Lech Lecha, the Me'artzcha, Mimoladatcha, Mibeis Avicha, to Bincha, Yechidcha, Sharahabta. There are certain comparisons to be made here, and this is something that they think about. Okay, they don't have to get the answer, they have to try. But questions 1 and 2, I would expect them to get the answer. So this is going to be my main resources that I'm going to give them each pasuk from the Akedah to work through on their own. My expectations are that we're going to work through a presentation at the end. Okay, I'll come back to that more soon in a second, actually. I will, as well as giving them these individual psukim, for the end of all the psukim, I'm going to give them a summary and consolidation worksheet to do on their own. So maybe they have to put everything in the right order. A mixed up story of okay, so they have to put it in the right order, maybe some questions they have to answer. Then they do the research on their own. Now, this point I want to discuss checkpoints and assessment because this is very important. When we set a project, it's not a day thing, it's like a week thing or something, right? You set it on a Monday and you expect them to hand it into you by Friday. So there are 2 issues. Number 1, we don't want them scrambling on Friday morning that they haven't yet done it. We need to kind of help them. It's independent work for the most part, and we need to help them self-regulate and get work efficiently towards a deadline. So we need to check in with them regularly that they're doing the work. So in this case, I would say, for example, I want you to do 3 psukim a day. I want you to write the answers on the bottom and the meaning and everything that answer all the questions that I've given you. And by 6 p.m. each day, you've got to submit those 3 psukim. Besides for helping the students reach the deadline, okay, making sure that they're all on track, it's also very important for assessment purposes because the end product of the project relies on them having understood all the steps along the way. So if they haven't understood the psukim, it's going to be a complete waste of time for them to do a project at the end. They've misunderstood. So at the end of the day, every day I can see have they understood the psukim of that day. Okay, then we can reconvene, and if a child hasn't understood, I can find a way of making contact. I can send out master sheets. If the child's consistently misunderstanding, I have to figure out a program for this child and how to help them. But I can see that the class is basically on track, right? So to check in with them, we don't just give them the research project and say that's it, I'll see you in a week. Okay, we make sure that there are regular checkpoints, that they've mastered each step and that they're on track. Also potentially, and again, this is more shaykh for a younger grade, but I'm going to say it anyways, is that I would also recommend things like at the end of each day, you've done these psukim, you've submitted them, we're going to hold a very short Zoom conference at the end of the day or at the beginning of the next morning, and I'm going to ask different students to read aloud and translate. Important to maintain a skill, important that we don't slide all the way down while we're off school, okay? Or I will choose a different student each day. I'll tell 3 students each day, actually, if I'm doing 3 psukim, to read 1 pasuk aloud and translate it and answer the questions on a WhatsApp voice note. And then or video, WhatsApp video, and I'll send that out to all the other children in the class. But that way, every child has a chance to read aloud for everybody. They can practice it beforehand, so it's nicer than being put on the spot in the school classroom. But they maintain their skills of reading and translating out loud, and they're also connecting and communicating with each other. So we have to, when we set them the research, we have to set up a system that we're constantly checking in and assessing different points. And then finally, they submit or present. So in this case, it will be present. How are we going to teach Akedah Sitzchut to a younger grade? So are we going to make a show, a play? Are we going to draw a picture or a storyboard to show what happened? Are we going to make a PowerPoint to show what happens? And then we can have a chance to present on Zoom. Maybe not everybody, it's a big class, but we choose some students. Each week we choose different students to present on Zoom. It's nice if it has an authentic feel. So we said the project is to teach it to the younger grades. So it's really nice if you invite grades from the nursery school or something to watch and to join in the Zoom conference, which is nice also for the parents of the nursery school. So it's a win-win for everybody, right? That the older kids feel validated and empowered, that they get to teach something to every girl wants to be a teacher, right? They get to teach something to the nursery school, and the nursery school kids also have something to do and something to learn for a certain amount of time. So that's example number 1. Example number 2, high school. So here, I'm not going to talk about using project instructions. I'm going to talk rather about using a key question. And I find in high school, potentially key questions work better than project instructions. So the key question is 2 key questions. It's why did Esav want to sell the Bechorah? And why did Yaakov want to buy the Bechorah? What was both of their motives, right? So we're going to meet on Zoom to discuss this. What do we need to know or ask in order to be able to answer this? So we've learned it in Parasha a bunch of times. We know the story well, right? So how are we going to answer this question? What are we going to do? So does anyone have any suggestions for where we should look, for which Mefarshim maybe we could look into? If it's in a higher grade and they've got experience in where we should look, where should we start within the Kodesh? Where should we look elsewhere? Any other questions that we need to answer in order to be able to answer this? So, I mean, what was the Bechorah exactly? So until we understand what the Bechorah was, we can't understand why Yaakov wanted to buy it so badly or why Esau wanted to sell it so badly. So a discussion, not everything necessarily is going to come up. It could be that you're going to guide them with some of those questions, but it's important for them to get into it and to reflect and think, well, what do I need to do? Then the teacher provides resources and expectations. So what I would give them, first of all, I would ask them to learn just the psukim, just the translation of the psukim. I would encourage them to do it with the chavrusa. I would give them some kind of basic worksheet, like put everything in the right order, but I don't know if that would be challenging enough. I might give them a worksheet, which I call find an example. I should have given you an example. I should have this on the slides, but all right. It's a grid where going down one side in the first column, it asks you to find an example for all kinds of things in the text. And on the other side, the students write the examples. So say, find an example of an instruction, find an example of a plural masculine verb, find an example of direct speech. I'm giving very, very basic examples, but you see what I'm saying? So a way for them to look at the text and make sure that they're looking at the chat. Or just a basic question with a basic worksheet with questions. Then what I would do to help them get into answering this question is I'd give them a sheet like this. So I've got the 2 key questions with very poor resolution over here, unfortunately. Why did Esav want to sell? Why did Yaakov want to buy? I've got 11 Mefarshim in total, with a range from Rav Hirsch to Malbim to Rishonim from the Kodesh, right? All kinds of Mefarshim. Some answer why did Esav want to sell, some answer why did Yaakov want to buy, and some are just important background Mefarshim. So what they have to do is they have to color in, and I would very much encourage them to do this with a chavrusa over the phone or with a parent or to do it with somebody. Why did Esav want to sell? Anytime you come across one of those that could answer that question, you highlight it or you color it in red. That's an Esav color, right? Anytime you come to a Mefarsh that says, why does Yaakov want to buy the Bechorah? You color that in green. So for example, yeah, Rashi Lamed Beis over here. So that would be in why did Esav want to sell? And then on a separate sheet, you summarize what the Mefarshim say just to make sure you've really understood this. So then I would ask them to submit to us, to submit different parts at certain points to make sure that they're all on track, right? And to assess that they're getting it correctly. And then I asked them to submit. We could do a presentation on Zoom. It's an older grade. We could go either way. I could ask them to submit maybe a diary entry from both points of view. Why did you want to buy? Why did you want to sell? A speech from both of them. Why did you want to buy? Why did you want to sell? Some way of writing up from the point of view of Esav or from the point of view of Yaakov. Why did you want to buy the Bechorah? Why did you want to sell the Bechorah? So again, just to go back to what I said earlier, it's not we're learning it and then we do a project at the end. Okay, it's you now have a burning question that we've spoken about, we've brought up and we've fleshed out a little bit. You have this burning question, now go for it. Go and work it out and come back to me with an answer. And there's motivation and context. It's not just about applying what you've learned, but it's a reason to learn. It's a reason to learn. Any questions at this point, or should I fly through a few more examples? Any questions? Okay, so let me go through a few more. So this is also a high school Chumash example. Why did Lot choose to live in Sodom? So I brought this as an example of something that I did once. This was like a small project. It didn't take very long. I did it in class. It would take longer outside class, obviously. But how like a very small thing in the Chumash can be made into something that you can analyze in depth. Like, why did he dafka choose Sodom over anything else? So you've got a whole analysis here that's like a really quite a big answer on that Sodom was Kudan Hashem Karetz Mitzrayim, and what's a comparison with Gan Eden being watered by water and Mitzrayim being watered by water, and the difference between Eretz Yisrael that it is dependent on rain and being dependent on a river and not having to rely on Hashem and Tefillah and Lot moving away from Hashem, right? And how it says by Yisrael Mikedem, he was moving away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rav Hirsch says he was following his eyes, right? We know Sodom was a bad place. So I would give them, again, all these sources. You look for it, you come back to me with an answer at the end as why did Lot choose Sodom? Okay, so what this could be a poster, it could be a poster was probably worked very well here. They could write up an answer, but that's more boring. A poster at the end as to with the different some sort of diagram or picture to show me why did Lot choose to pick? Why did Lot choose to live in Sodom? Another example. Okay, so this is a higher grade in high school. This is like maybe a 12th grade or something. I'm from England and South Africa, so we're definitely behind you in terms of our skills. So if I say 12th grade and you're looking at this and thinking, oh my goodness, never anything beyond 10th grade, excuse me. So this is a project on the Mon. The Mon, when Hashem gives the Mon to Bnei Israel, he says, I'm giving you Mon Hashemam, Leman, and Asena Hayelech B'Sorasiyim, right? You can see at the top here. So the key question is going to be, what was the Nisayon exactly about the Mon and finding food on your doorstep every day, right? Every single Mefarish in the Mikras Gedolos deals with this. They all have an answer to suggest for this. So we discuss the question. I give the students a data capture sheet like this. I encourage them to do it in Chabrissa. They have to find an answer to this question according to every single one of the Mefarshim. Then step number 2 for the project is I want to group them into themes. So now, depending on how advanced your group is, if you want to give them the themes or if they have to find the themes on their own, that would depend on your group. But the 3 themes that they can be grouped into essentially are the Nisayon of dependence, that you were completely dependent on Hashem for the Mon, there was nothing you could do to help yourself for it. Deprivation, that you only had Varyon B'Yomai, right? You never had nothing in your pantry for the next day. And abundance, that you didn't have to actually work for anything. You had as much as you needed the whole time. So even though they sound a little bit contradictory, they're all present, all these 3 Nisyonos. And the Mefarshim speak about all of them. So maybe I would ask them to make a big Venn diagram for their final presentation. I want a big Venn diagram. And I want these 3 themes. And you have to write in which Mefarish goes according to which theme and how they say that. And then as an additional step, how can you apply that to modern day challenges, which is probably especially relevant right now, right? Like, and I mean, all 3 of the Nisyonos, the deprivation. I went shopping this morning and to buy groceries, and there were a lot of very, very basic things that I couldn't get. There's the Nisayon of dependence. I don't know if I mean, a lot of us have never felt more dependent in our lives, right? And abundance also is a sign that we're recognizing now in Mafreya, that we see how we lived with so much abundance. When you look at these videos and pictures of chasanas that they're down to the bare bones, and we realize like we lost so much of ourselves and our understanding of what was important in the abundance that we had. So these are things that they could really apply right now. I'll answer your question in a second. They could really apply right now. They start with the question, what was the Nisayon? They get into it, they find the answers themselves, that they present to you. Yeah, what's your question?
Hope it's okay. Is it okay that we raise a kind of a question? Would you rather we just...
Please, no, please ask me questions.
Okay. So I guess my question is, this is very nice for the girls to discover on their own and do learning on their own, but what kind of support are you giving them to understand the Rashi? I mean, you said it's a 12th grade, so maybe they could do it, but let's say a 9th or a 10th grade class, what other support are you giving them to be able to understand the Rashi, the Ramban? Now, if it's in class and you're circling and they can ask you questions, then that would be fine. But being that it's distance and you're not there, what other resources did you give them to help them understand these Mefarshim?
Absolutely. Okay, so two things. First of all, is I would say that you could do this over a Zoom class, as in put them into breakout rooms. If you're starting to use Zoom, as you said, right? You can put them into breakout rooms and they can do this in chavrusas, and there's an option where you can join the breakout rooms to go around to make sure that everyone is engaged and on track, right? And they can ask you a question and ask you to join their breakout room and help them. So that works almost like a classroom. And I would say that's a much, much more effective way of using Zoom than just teaching. So we're still using Zoom, but we're using it in a completely different kind of way than lecturing, which is much more valuable. I would also say that I would give them, I do often give them things to do completely on their own. And yes, I am there to support them, but a big class of 30 girls or something, there's very limited support. Like it really needs to be, they need to be able to do it on their own, right? So I would give them support sheets, so vocabulary if they need it. I would take, but this is a 12th grade, so I expect them to be able to do it themselves, right? But otherwise, I would take a Ramban, break it down into 6 parts, and to each part write a very short question so they can digest and understand, right? With a lot of vocabulary assistance and tailor it so that it is something they're able to do on their own. And then again, as I said, there are checkpoints. So we make sure we've understood at different points. So we don't come to the end and like we haven't understood anything. I also want to say, sorry?
Yeah, that makes sense. You're giving them more than just this paper.
Right.
You're giving them more support.
Yeah. Well, and 12th grade, I might give them just this paper, but yeah.
Right.
If they need more help, of course I'll give them more help. I'd also say, and the breaking down the Farshim is the biggest thing in support, more than the vocabulary help I find. That it's when you see a chunk of text of like 15 lines, you're overwhelmed. But if there's a sentence and a question and a sentence and a question, you can really do it. And I've like broken down some very, very complex Rashis that way and really had the girls do it on their own. But I want to add at this point, and this is a good time to do it, that there's a lot of opportunity for differentiation in this kind of way of teaching, especially at the moment, because you're distributing projects, right? So there's nothing, it's not going to be a lot of extra work for you to make 3 projects, so to speak. You have 1 basic project, 1 you give a little less vocabulary assistance, and maybe, so let's take this Leman and Asena example, okay? So this is your bare bones, not bare bones, this is your basic project. Then for your brighter students, you're gonna ask them to find the 3 themes on their own. For your average students, you're gonna give them the 3 themes. For your weaker students, you're gonna give them a lot more vocabulary support and maybe broken down Farshim and so on. So it's not tons of extra work for you. You take your basic thing, you add 1 or 2 questions and take out a little bit of support for your brighter, and you add in a little bit more support for your weaker, and you maybe take off some of these questions. Maybe for your, you have 2 students in the class who are really not going to manage this so well, you just put in Rashi and Ramban and Rashban, and they can do that with support. And they don't have to do all of it. So there's a lot of ways to differentiate without actually it being a lot of extra work for you. Clear? That makes sense? Okay, great. Let's talk about a few more examples very quickly. So what time? Yeah, we have another 10 minutes. Okay, so for example, a high school chumash, can a person be born bad? This is like a bit of a $1 million question, right? So I would use this in the beginning of Parashas Kodesh, where you have Rivka's pregnancy with the twins, the birth of the twins, how they're born. They seem to have these defining characteristics as they're born, how they grow up, and you see their differences. Is there such a thing as being born bad? And then you can use the Rambam Hilchos Deos, okay, on different temperaments that people are born with, and the Rambam Hilchos Tshuva, that every person can be like Moshe Rabbeinu, and the comparison between David HaMelech and Esav and Admaini, right? So there are all these things that we can use to build up an answer of, is there such a thing as being born bad? And then what was I born like? And what circumstances and temperaments and tendencies and midas was I given, and what can I do with them? So that's another example. Primary school, lower, you can use lower middle school, Parsha example. to a project to create an artifact museum on the parsha. So I'm going to ask you in your own time to listen to Rabbi Jorovel on the parsha. And I just want to say, I don't know how well you know Rabbi Jorovel, but I've been a big fan for years. That all his recordings are now available on Torah Masara website for free for the meanwhile, while there's coronavirus, right? So it's the turesponse.org is the website. All his recordings are there. There's like an hour and 20 minutes of solid talking about every single parsha. I think my daughter's been addicted since she's like 3 years old or something. And the depth and the breadth with which he discusses the parsha for elementary and lower middle school is probably even lower middle, I don't know, maybe not, but definitely elementary school is unbelievable. So I would direct you to listen to that. Those are your resources. And you've got to create a museum based on things in the parsha. So I need a minimum of 3 artifacts, but you can do as many as you want. For each one, you have to say what the connection is to the parsha, or I don't know, something like that. And it's a creative opportunity for them to listen to the parsha and then make it into something that they make something solid out of it that they can then present and demonstrate their understanding, right? Okay, and the reality is that Chumash is the easiest subject to make into research projects. I mean, everything, the Chumash learning is based on questions. That's how we work. So you start with a question and you've got your project there. But let's talk exactly about how do I start. So whenever you begin any teaching, we always begin with what's our outcome for the learning, right? What do I want the students to know, understand, to be able to do by the end of it? So, for example, I want them to learn the parsha. So that's your museum artifacts example, right? Or I want them to I want them to research and learn about a specific mitzvah or a new mitzvah. They should choose their own mitzvah to research. So that's my outcome. Maybe I want them to know how the mitzvah applies nowadays. I want them to know the Sharash HaMitzvah, okay? I want them to think of an example of somebody that did this mitzvah, and so on, okay? So those are my outcomes. I then think what project will enable them to achieve this outcome. So what project can I think? Anyone want to suggest something? What project can I set that will help the students go and take this away and learn about a mitzvah on their own? So I'll give you examples soon of generic things that you can apply, like templates or projects. But what I would say over here, simple, is design a flyer explaining to somebody who doesn't know anything about this mitzvah all about the mitzvah. Okay, so a poster or a flyer, an information page. So to teach somebody else, okay? And again, that's like one of your big cop-outs. Whenever you're not sure what project to do, it's teach somebody else about it. It's a great way to learn. Or very often what we're going to do is we're going to start with a key question. So if my outcome for learning, say for example, my outcome for learning is to understand whether there's such a thing as good or bad laughter, whether there's such a thing as negative laughter, okay? Or is all laughter good? So I want them to understand my learning outcomes are, I want them to understand that there were different kinds of laughter in the story of Sarah and Ishmael, okay? So and Abraham, so when Sarah heard that she was going to have a baby, she laughed, and she laughed when she had a baby. Then Abraham laughed when he heard the news, okay? And how it describes that Ishmael wasn't tzachik also. So the sharash tzachak is used in a lot of different ways. So I want them to understand that there's such a thing as good and bad laughter, and I want them to be able to identify different examples of good and bad laughter. This is like a more primary school kind of example, okay? So step number 1 is I'm going to ask a big question about this for the students. So when I say a big question always has to be something, we don't want to ask, for example, a question for a project isn't going to be, why did, I'm trying to think of something we said until now, and I've gone completely blank, but okay, when Sarah laughed, was it a good thing or something, okay? But if you ask something like, is laughter a good thing? Is there ever such a thing as negative laughter? That's more relevant, it's more compelling, it's more of a broad way and holistic way of looking at the whole picture. So I begin by asking a big question, And then I think how the student's going to present their answers to the question. So I've got my big question, and they are going to present their answer to the question by either designing a game with examples of good and bad laughter, or a story that demonstrates good and bad laughter, and so on. Okay, so I think about what do I want them, I start by thinking, what do I want them to know, be able to do, understand by the end? Either a project that's going to help them do this, or if there's a question which there generally is in Chumash and in Historia and in a lot of other subjects, what question can I ask? And then how can they present answers to this question? So I'm going to make it simple and give you a whole bunch of templates of projects and questions and presentation examples. And then you can literally just go through the list and pick the one that's relevant for you. And that kind of makes it all easier. So for example, suggestions for projects and how they're going to present. So they can make a diagram, they can make a flow chart, they can write a diary entry. Okay, so write a diary entry to describe Eliezer's journey, not a diary entry, but a whole diary, Eliezer's experience of finding a wife for Yitzchak, or a diary entry of the Sar HaMashkim, a diary with lots of entries of the Sar HaMashkim that's going to tell the whole story of Yosef and Yosef coming out of jail and becoming the Savnas Kaneach, right? Or this is a really nice one, it's for younger grades probably, but create an alphabet or an Aleph base book. So you know how you have Aleph base books where Aleph is for Achtus and base is for Brachas and Gimel is for Gemilas Chasadim, right? So based on this one, so let's say for example, you've learned Megillas Rus, you're going to write an Aleph base book, and for each letter of the Aleph base, you have to think of something else from Megillas Rus and write a little bit about it, explaining it. Compare it to something else, create an interactive game, have a debate, okay, create a model. And I'm going to send you these slides, as I said, so you can pick something from this list for a project, okay? So you think of what's my outcome for the learning, what project will enable them to achieve this outcome. When you have a list in front of you, it's so much easier. I keep a list in front of me the whole time of different examples, different projects and ideas for starter activities in my lesson and ideas for assessment, and I go through my list and I just pick something that's going to be relevant for that one. The second thing is the key question. So there are a lot of, these are templates for kinds of questions. So there are what is questions, what is a simon, what is gnei masas, what is a heilig rachel. Then there's the what was the purpose of, or what is the purpose of, right? What's the purpose of tefillah? What's the purpose of the egla rufa? And so on, millions more examples like this, right? Similarities and differences between different questions. So characters and events in Jewish history or in Tanakh. Similarities and differences between Yitzhar pre and post Chet. Big project potential there. Torah halachic perspective on animal rights, forgiving someone who's wronged you, and evet, so on. Why did lots of things here, right? Why did Hashem test Abraham? Why did Hashem rebel? Why did Yosef tell his brothers his dreams? And many, many, many more. And was someone justified in, was Yoav justified in killing Abner, which is a massive debate, okay? Massive sugya in the Gemara, and were the brothers justified in selling Yosef, etc. So you choose your question, okay? You pick a question, and then what project can I choose for them to present their answer? And then to add one more level of complexity to your project instructions for higher grades is to add in a sentence like this as part of the project instructions. So the clarify something for someone else, okay? Simplify a complicated thing is a very good thing, a very good critical thinking skill. Think of an analogy for something. Okay, theorize about what a certain historical personality would say about a certain thing that we're experiencing nowadays. So what I want to show you here, you can see I put some in blue. I want to show you how I can literally use these three lists to create a project. So for example, I'm going to start with a key question. What's a Torah perspective on animal rights? Okay, I just picked anything arbitrarily. So what's a Torah perspective on animal rights? My key question. So now I've got, I want to add some complexity. So I want to change the mind of a secular animal rights journalist about the Torah view on how we treat animals. And then how are they going to present this? They'll write a newspaper article defending the position of the Torah perspective on how we treat animals. So again, start with a key question. Choose a project that's going to help you answer that key question, and you can add one more level of complexity and use something from this list, which is like another level of critical thinking and analysis. 2 tips before I take more questions. Number 1, simplicity is key. So especially if you're not there, you're not able to answer questions. So you want to make this as simple as possible. But that doesn't mean you want to make the thinking part you don't want to make the students thinking as simple as possible, right? You want to make it as simple as possible to follow. So that means instructions should be very, very simple, and resources should be limited. Not limited, but there shouldn't be like 16 places that they have to look at. They should be neatly together in one place, or one combined into one video, one pack, or whatever it may be. The challenge and the critical thinking doesn't happen from there being multiple instructions. If there's one very challenging instruction and the resources are not complicated, but they're challenging in and of themselves, then it's a challenging activity. But you don't want to make it complicated. Wait, was I supposed to do this, or do I need to do this now, or did she mean this, or did she mean that, right? So simplicity is very important. The second thing I would also say is that you want to aim for longer assignments. So the assignments I've spoken about till now, they're not like a 1 lesson thing. They're not a 1-hour project. They're a week-long project. And I would recommend at this point that we aim to set projects of a week. So that way you sit down, you prepare it all in a chunk, and then it's there for the week. But maybe as a school policy, as a teacher, I don't know how many subjects you teach in, but to aim for maybe 1 Chumash project a week, 1 other subject project a week. And that's it for Kodesh. And that's a lot to get your teeth into and to work at and develop, but not to overwhelm, not the students and not ourselves. Okay, any questions before I end off? Okay, so I just want to end off by saying that there are potentially a lot of things that are more difficult to teach right now. So you would know that, you would be able to answer that yourself for your own subject. Some things that maybe we have to put on hold. There is a global crisis, and it's not going to be the end of the world if some things are taught a little bit late. Some things really are ideally done in a classroom setting. But there's a lot of opportunity for enrichment at the moment. So perhaps we can use this time to do things that we don't necessarily otherwise have curriculum time for, which is a great opportunity for the students. Things that we would always love for them to learn, and we would love to teach them, but we never have the time to actually cover in the classroom. So I want to give you some examples of projects that you can set students pretty simply, that are enrichment, that are not necessarily directly related to the curriculum, but are very valuable in terms of everything that we want them to come out of school with. So for example, to research a midah, to research a mitzvah, we already spoke about that one, to research a different Jewish community somewhere in the world. I had such beautiful things done this way with the 5th grade ones. Research a topic in Jewish history. A book report. One of the best projects I did in high school when I was in grade 11, I had to do 2 book reports, one on biography of a Gadol, I chose it myself, and one on a Holocaust book, which I also had to choose myself, with very specific and guided instructions from my teacher. So for example, for the Holocaust, we had to talk about how you see them staying strong in their emunah, even in challenging circumstances, 3 examples of how you would see that, and so on, right? So, everybody has a Gadol biography at home or a Holocaust book at home, or both. Okay, so that's an example of something that you can set without it being too difficult or onerous for you, that is tremendously enriching for your students. Learn some Navi. So again, now I direct you to Rabbi Jeraval Navi. My son, who is in grade 1, has listened to Rabbi Jeraval and Eliyahu Navi, and he's made a book on stories of Eliyahu Navi all by himself. A chance to learn sometimes, okay? So especially boys, they never have the chance to learn this. So it's a chance to learn something that you wouldn't otherwise have the chance to learn, because this is an easier project for us to set right now, and you'll learn a lot from it. Research the differences between Yerushalayim, Bisman, and Mikdash, and now. That's a little random, but it's a lot to learn, potentially. And halacha, I would say, I would be very nervous of teaching halacha at the moment. I would prefer for it to be done in a classroom setting with the teachers seeing exactly what's going on and everyone being able to ask questions, not in a clumsy Zoom kind of way. But there's a lot of halacha that you can do via project learning. So only Hilchos Bein Noach, I won't do other halacha this way. But Hilchos Lashon Hara, Hilchos Kiddush Hashem, there is so much to do in a project on Kiddush Hashem in terms of what qualifies as a Kiddush Hashem. Is a Kiddush Hashem only for Goyim, only in front of Goyim? Does the level of Kiddush Hashem depend on who you are, or is it the same for all people? Is something considered more of Chillul Hashem if done by someone else? There are so many questions to ask and so many Makoros to directly answer these questions, to be put together into a massive project at the end where the students develop their skills from looking at Makoros, where they develop their research skills, where they develop their putting things together in a presentation skills, and they learn a lot of actual content and a lot of actual material. And I just want to end this by saying that it's not just enrichment for the students, but it's also very, very much enrichment for us as teachers. And I think we have to try and see the positive in this. There's a lot of negative things about the coronavirus, but in terms of education, I think that it's only been a positive thing. I think it's caused us to really strip away a lot of what's going on and really evaluate what our value add is as a teacher. Why do I need to, if I can do the whole thing via video, or if I can teach on Zoom and not have anybody answer any questions or anything, or send out a video recording and just count that as learning done, where do I come in as a teacher? What do I add? What do I bring to the classroom? There's a lot of questions that we're asking ourselves at the moment, which is fantastic. And I think it's also an opportunity to develop teaching skills and pedagogies that we don't usually do, that we know are good, but we never really get around to because we have excuses. So active learning is a big example of one of these, where we know active learning is very important. We know it's important to engage our students, and we know it's important for them to think critically, but we don't have time to prepare lessons like this because we are so busy, and we don't have curriculum time because there's so much of teaching that's going to take longer to teach in this way. But at the moment, those excuses are different, because it doesn't take longer to prepare a project than it does to teach for an hour and a half on Zoom every single day. And curriculum time has very different meanings at the moment. There isn't that same pressure to finish the same number of psukim and to finish the same content. And so this is a time where we can develop a skill like teaching with active learning. And then when we come back to the classroom, I think we'll find that it's part of our repertoire and we're better at it and we're better teachers because of it. So if we can really find ways at the moment to develop our teaching styles, we come back to the classroom and we still have those improved teaching skills, we will be so much better teachers from it. So I wish you a lot of hatzlacha, and please feel free to ask if you have any questions. So
I have a question.
Were to be able to design activities that rely less on the teacher and more on the students, and require more critical thinking and active engagement. So good to those. Do we think we have done those? Yeah, anyone? And I've put my email address there. Please feel free to email me. Whoops, I've lost it. If you have any questions.
I have a question. Can I ask you a question?
Sure, please.
How much are you in touch with the girls throughout the week with questions or support, like while they're doing their research?
Yeah. Okay, so 1 second, sorry, I'm just